Hey there, creepy peeps. So today I thought I would do a kind of different sort of horror movie review on here. Since the early 2000s kind of started this big trend in horror movie remakes, I thought I could do a kind of remake versus original horror movie review discussion sort of thing. Because there are a lot of horror movie remakes out there. So maybe this can become a thing if you guys enjoy it. Today I'm going to be talking about The Hills Have Eyes and its remake. So the original Hills Have Eyes movie came out in 1977, directed by Wes Craven, and its remake came out in 2006 and was directed by Alexander Aja, I believe that's how you say his last name, I'm not sure. I was a little apprehensive when I saw that Aja was directing this remake, because this was the first time I've actually seen the remake. I have seen the original once before. This is the first time I was seeing the remake, believe it or not. And Aja has previously been involved in Mirrors, which I liked, P2, which I liked, but he also directed The Pyramid. And if you guys saw my movie review on The Pyramid, you will know that I wasn't a big fan of that movie. But little quickie review, he did not do a bad job in this remake, in my opinion. So yeah, both movies are very much survival stories. They both are centered around the Carter family, who is on, I think in both movies they are on a vacation, a family vacation to celebrate the patriarch and matriarch's wedding anniversary. So, and I believe in both movies they are on their way to California, and of course they take a shortcut or a detour through the desert. If you're in a horror movie and you're on a road trip, do not take the detour, do not take the shortcut, because it always ends badly, right? So of course they're taking this shortcut or detour through the desert, and they are attacked by other people that live in the desert. I'll get into the differences on that in a little bit. So in both films, the Carter family at the very beginning is stopping at a gas station in the desert, where there is kind of our Harbinger character. They kind of play off of this a little bit in The Cabin in the Woods, if you guys remember, who is basically like, it's the gas station owner, and he's basically there to give the audience, like, you know, like a warning, like if they continue on this path, if the Carter family decides to try and go through the desert, something bad is going to happen to them. So in both instances, it's the gas station owner, and it's kind of set up that the gas station owner helps out the family that is living in the desert, the family that is living in the desert in some way. Like they trade, he trades food and gas and goods for valuables that the family, that the desert people, I'll call them the desert people for now, that the desert people take off of the families they attack. And also in both movies, you get like a small scene where the gas station owner is saying that he wants out. He doesn't want anything to do with the desert people anymore. He doesn't, because he knows what they do to these families, and he also, as I imagine, kind of has to deal with the families before this happens, like he is with the Carter family. Like he has to kind of meet them, and he usually talks to them. So I imagine it wears on his character a lot that he meets these families and sees these families or groups of people, and he's essentially sending them to their death. A really interesting difference I found in between the original and the a really interesting difference I noticed between the original and the remake is the gas station owner in both movies wants out. He doesn't want to deal with the family anymore, but the gas station owner in the original outright warns the Carter family, don't go through the desert. He doesn't tell them why, but he just says, don't take the road through the desert. Go back, get on the highway, go that way, take the safe route. He says that. He's warning the family multiple times. He even yells it after the car as they drive away. Get back on the highway. Don't take this road. which I thought was interesting compared to the remake, where the gas station owner tells them about the road through the desert, and basically sends them down that dangerous path. And you can kind of tell in his character and the actor's character that he is kind of, he doesn't want to, but it's more like resigned, like he's just kind of like giving in, like because that's what he's been doing. So I thought that was an interesting difference. I'm not fully sure in my head what I think that means, why there was that difference. I guess I should say I'm not really worried about spoiler alerts in this. The remake has been out since 2006. It's 2015. It's almost 10 years it's been out. And the original came out in 1977, which is almost 40 years ago. So I am absolutely not worried about spoiler alerts. I don't care about spoilers in these reviews. You've had long enough to see both films. Anyways, I'm not really sure what that difference means in my head, but I thought that was a very interesting difference in that, you know, it's small because the Carter family ends up getting to the same destination anyway. But I just thought that was an interesting difference. Some similarities between the original and the remake is definitely kind of like the people that are killed and the people that end up fighting to the end. There's definitely the main kind of car crash, the car breaking down in the desert, which is sabotage, which you see. Definitely we kind of have the same order of events. There's like the sabotage of the car, there's the initial attack on the car in the trailer, where one of the children, Lynn, is killed protecting her baby. The father is killed because basically the car breaks down. I'm not going to spend too long describing the plot of this movie. Again, you've had long enough to see it. You should know what the plot is if you've seen it already. Basically, the car breaks down and the father, Bob Carter, walks back towards the gas station to try and get help, and one of the children's, Lynn's husband, walks in another direction to try and see where the road, like where they would have continued driving to see where the road goes, to see if he can find help that way. The husband of one of the children, Doug, his name is in both movies, Doug, comes back and says the road just ends. Interestingly enough, in the remake, we get to see where Doug goes. He finds like a big crater full of old abandoned cars, which in the movie we realize are the cars of families or people that have been through already and that the desert people have killed. And this is kind of like their dumping ground. In the movie, Doug simply thinks it's just a dump in the middle of the desert, which isn't an illogical thought, but we're in a horror movie, so we know what it means. So he comes back and telling the family the road just dead ends, like this road was going nowhere anyway. And then Big Bob, the father, finds the gas station owner and is attacked there, where he is then tied to a tree near the trailer. And that's where we start the trailer attack, where the family is attacked. They kind of draw them out of the trailer by setting Big Bob on fire on this tree that they've set up. Kind of like very crucifixion-y, like he's kind of tied up to a tree with his arms out like this, and they set him on fire. And that kind of draws most of the family out, where they are free to attack the trailer. Where the sister in this movie, Brenda, is raped by one of the desert people, and Lynn is killed, the mother, Ethel Carter, is killed, and they kidnap Lynn and Doug's baby, Catherine. That's kind of like the inciting event. That's where we really meet the desert people for the most part, and this is where the Carter family realizes that they are not alone in the desert and they are under attack. The son in both movies, Bobby, he kind of figures it out earlier on, because of course they have dogs. There's a lot of animals in these movies, but of course they have dogs, which I always get apprehensive about in horror movies, because even though I know in these movies nowadays they would never harm an animal for the sake of a movie, I still, they always get harmed in the movie universe, and I don't like it. But they have dogs, and of course the dogs sense something that they don't, and one of the dogs runs off after something, and Bobby chases her and finds that the dog has been gutted by the desert people, we understand. He kind of knows earlier on that there's something off with the desert, and he kind of tries to warn them. Like, he doesn't outright say like there's something wrong until later on, but he just tries to keep everyone together, like, and keep everyone safe, which doesn't work, obviously, because a lot of people are killed and the baby is kidnapped in the end. Another similarity in both movies, we both get this kind of like bird's eye binocular view, which we understand is kind of like the eyes of the hills that we get the title from, which is the desert people watching them from afar before they even attack. So you always get this kind of like scopy kind of binocular view where you see the outline of the binoculars and he's watching the family. I think that's kind of like pertinent to both because that's the eyes of the hills, you know? Another huge difference in the remake is the desert people themselves. So in the original, we get some backstory from the gas station owner. When Big Bob goes back to find the gas station owner, he learns that the gas station owner actually is the father to like the patriarch of the desert people. And the gas station owner kind of tells a story about how his son was like a little off in the head and violent and not right. And he basically runs off into the desert with some whore, and they kind of have a family. So I kind of get the idea that the desert people are kind of like backcountry, maybe inbred psychos, essentially. It's very different from the remake where the desert people are actually like mutants. They live in this nuclear testing town. You know how they would like we would set up like towns in the desert, and they would set up like mannequins and actually like kind of like build these homes and places to test like what would happen in like a nuclear fallout, like the blast that ensues after a bomb is dropped. They kind of live in one of these test towns, like these nuclear test towns, with all these creepy mannequins, which is of course a creepy scene in the movie, but they've all been affected by the radiation, so they all have something wrong with them. Like they have like enlarged heads, they have like defects that are very defects that are common with exposure to radiation. So that's like a huge difference in the movie, where 1977 they are kind of like inbred backwoods psychos, and in 2006 they're kind of victims. They're victims of this radiation, and they've become angry because of what happened to them, and that's why they are kind of taking it out on other families. They're both similar in both movies in the sense that they're angry at kind of like the normal American family. In the original, I remember one of the, I can't remember which one of the desert people like kind of like yelling out like you come out here and you shove your life in my face or something like that, like kind of showing it off or something. So you get the sense that they're both angry at like kind of like the traditional American family, the traditional American way, because it's not their life, it's not what they know, and I get the sense that they wish that they had that. But in a sense, in both movies, it's kind of like the haves versus the have-nots. Like you get like this traditional American family, which you get like has its own problems obviously, but they kind of have everything, and they're kind of pitted against this other family of sorts that has had a lot taken away from them, and they're very resentful, and that's why they're attacking this family. Like I said before, it's very much a survival story. They both kind of have a lot to do with like the American way, the traditional American family, and the people that don't have that. So I think that's, especially as far as like American horror movies go, I feel like that is a theme that doesn't That's a theme that it really doesn't, it's not, I don't know the words I'm looking for. It's kind of timeless. Like that's a theme, or that's kind of like a trend that translates no matter what decade it's the movie is showing in. So I think that's part of what makes this remake work as well as it does, because a lot of remakes, if we're taking into account that horror movies reflect the fears of society during the time they were made, then a lot of remakes sometimes fail because what was going on in the world prior to 1977 and during like around 1977 is much different than what is going on, or what was going on prior to 2006. There were some similarities. We were kind of both in a war, or we're both experiencing some form of war in these, but it's very different. So I feel like that's why sometimes remakes don't work, because the original was kind of made for a very different audience. Different things were going on in the world, so sometimes that story doesn't translate as well in modern times when different things are going on. But this kind of like have versus have-nots, and this very American theme, and like there's definitely some commentary on war in here. I feel like it translates a little better between these two time periods, so I feel like that's why the remake works as well as it does. There's definitely some imagery on kind of like the war in Iraq in this 2006 version. I distinctly remember one scene where there is an American flag used as a weapon, which I thought was very interesting. Doug uses it and like stabs through the neck in one of the mutants, and I thought that was very interesting imagery, because this is obviously post 9/11 in 2006, and in 2006 we're still like, this is kind of like the war on terror time, so I thought that was very interesting. I was reading in, I think it was horror films, I was reading in Horror Films FAQ by John Muir, that I believe it was in this one. He was talking about like America's kind of like history of violence and how this kind of reflects that, and I thought that was interesting, and I agreed with that as well. Another thing I found interesting in the remake was Doug is kind of like our final girl of sorts in both movies. He's not the only one that survives, but the desert people, the psychos or the mutants, they take his daughter in the attack on the trailer. So he has a lot of reason to go after the family, and he actually goes after the family. The brother and sister, Bobby and Brenda, they kind of have like a little Home Alone scene where they're like defending the camp, and they're like booby trapping it to to catch some of these desert people. But Doug is actually the one that like goes into the devil's den, as it were, and attacks the psychos, attacks the mutants to save his daughter. Thought it was very interesting in the remake that Doug is previously shown as a passive character, like anti-guns. Big Bob makes a joke at him, or like takes a little jab at him, that Doug is a Democrat and very anti-gun. You kind of get this sense that like Big Bob is like the stereotypical American, like right to bear arms, stuff like that, and Doug is kind of like a pacifist, anti-gun. Anyone else notice that in the original versus the remake, Doug's last name is Wood in 1977, and in 2006 he's Bukowski, and he is wearing, I noticed he was wearing a Star of David. Anyone else find that interesting? I don't like, there's very clearly a difference. They very obviously made Doug Jewish in the remake, and it's not mentioned or anything. I just thought that was really interesting that he was Jewish. I don't know if like the actor is, and he just, I don't know, but they changed the last name too, and it sounds like a Jewish last name. or it could be. Anyone else notice that? I don't know. If anyone has any explanation for that, please tell me down below, because I thought that was the strangest difference. But anyways, Doug is very much a pacifist in the remake, and it's interesting how he gives into this violence to solve his problem, like to get his daughter back. He goes on a murderous rampage, and a lot of the body count in this movie is Doug's doing in the remake. He contributes heavily to the body count in this, which I thought was an interesting concept, that it's not like the patriarch of the family, it's not the big, strong detective, it's not the stereotypical American man, like, it's the pacifist, the anti-gun. He's the one that's like brandishing the guns, brandishing the weapons, and fighting. And he is successful. He is successful. In both movies, he successfully defeats the desert people and gets his daughter back. The original ends very abruptly. There's a very intense scene where Doug is repeatedly attacking one of the desert people. And then it just ends. Like, I guess you get the impression that he wins. In the remake, there is a little more of a resolution. And in both movies, very important plot points is one of the desert people, Ruby, you get is kind of like you kind of understand they're the youngest in both kind of groups. In the original and the remake, they're the youngest of like the desert people, the psychos and the mutants. And they are the only ones that kind of, they have more of a moral compass, I would say. They actually help out the Carter family. Like, they understand that this baby is very innocent and needs to be protected, and they actually, and Ruby in both movies actually steals the baby away from the violent desert family and helps in getting it back. Getting Catherine back to Doug. And in the remake, interestingly enough, she sacrifices herself to save Doug and Catherine. That's a very important similarity in both, a very important plot point, that one of the attackers doesn't actually want to participate in this violence. And they're I don't know. I just thought that's very interesting in both. They're not really with their family. They don't really fit in. So yeah, final remarks. I think that this remake holds up. I think it successfully takes the original story and brings something new to the table that's interesting. I feel like that's really important with a remake. You can't just verbatim spit out a modern version of the same exact story. I think in my opinion, for a remake to be successful, you have to bring something a little new, a little different to the table to help it translate to a more modern audience. And I feel like that this remake does that well. It holds true to the original story, but it just puts its own little twist on it that's very interesting, and I think it works well for this movie. So I approve this remake. I'm not saying that, like, this in no way means that I'm not saying one is better than the other. Like, the original is always gonna have, like, it's always gonna have a leg up, I feel like, because it was the it was the first, like, without the 1977 The Hills Have Eyes, directed by Wes Craven, we probably wouldn't have 2006 The Hills Have Eyes. Like, I don't know that we would have this movie. We probably wouldn't. So, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I always try and look at them as two separate movies for the most part, but I approve this remake. I love the original. I approve this remake. So if you have seen either of these movies or both of these movies, please let me know in the comments what you think about them, what you think about the similarities and differences. Let's start a discussion down there. Let's start some horror movie nerd discussion down below about these movies, the differences and similarities. And let me know if you think the remake holds up to the original at all. Comment, like if you feel so inclined, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more of my face and hear more of my voice. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, stay strange.